this Sunday we have this wonderful apostle reading, which of course is very famous. It talks about the spiritual armour, the whole armour of truth. And it's wonderful that St. Paul starts by saying to us, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. That the Lord is the source of strength. It doesn't come from within us, but it is the power of God's might that makes it possible for us to be strong in the Lord. Without God's might, we would be helpless and hopeless. But we have this great comfort that God gives his strength to us. During the liturgy we sing, Holy God, Holy Mighty, Holy Immortal, have mercy on us. And when we talk of God's might, God's power there, we know that it's something that he doesn't keep for himself, but rather he seeks to share with us. Picture the wonderful icon of the holy Archangel Michael, the chief commander of the bodiless powers, seated on horseback, on a horse which he basically seems to grip with his legs, because in one hand he has a sword or a spear, in the other hand he supports the book of the Gospels, and the trumpet sounding, the signal, the trumpet signal of God is there coming from his mouth. The angels, symbolized in this wonderful icon, are full of the power of God. Not their own power, not their own might, but they are strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. We come across the saints who have worked great miracles and great wonders. We read of St. John, the wonder worker of Shanghai and San Francisco, and as Vladika always adds, and Brussels, and says, look at this. In the Philippines, taking all of those orphans and all of those displaced Russians and Ukrainians and whatever land they were from in the empire, taking them into exile again from the Maoists, and he faced the whole destructive power of nature and stood with a cross on a headland and faced the tsunami and the typhoon, and he prayed, and he was strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Think of the stories of the martyrs who went into lands where they worshipped idols, and they went into the temples of these idols, and they made the sign of the cross, and the idols fell down and shattered from the places where they were standing. And why? Because these martyrs were strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Again and again we read such wonderful miracles in the lives of the saints, because God's strength and God's power was operative in their lives. The men and the women and even children amongst the martyrs, who have been filled with this power and have worked great wonders, have done so precisely because they have done what this epistle calls us to do. In the words of St. Paul, put on the whole armour of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. It's when we are clothed in this whole spiritual armour that we can face the world. And the important thing is this armour is spiritual. We've heard in the Psalms, even today in that first antiphon, we hear these words which tell us to not put our trust in princes, in the sons of men, to not put our trust in earthly things, in earthly power, in earthly might, but rather to put our trust in God. And when we live in days like these, when there is such violence, there is such loss of life, there is such tragedy, We begin to understand the futility of putting our trust in earthly things, of putting our trust in bullets and bombs. This is not to say that we should be defenceless at any point, and there isn't a place for defence. But what it does say is the ultimate battle to which we should all look is not the battle of this world, of bombs, of armies, but rather the spiritual battle. And this spiritual battle is one that wages all the time. And this is the problem. It wages all the time. It wages subtly. The subtle attack, the subtle war, is something that we miss. It's no accident that in that old-fashioned English there, we hear about the wiles of the devil. This isn't upfront stuff. This is the devil who comes in order to attack us in such a way that hopefully, for him, we won't even know that we are being attacked. That is the subtlety of this battle. And this is why we need to clothe ourselves with this spiritual armour. If we think about the things that we bring to confession, very often these things are going on in our lives and we do not even know. We're attacked with temptation, iskushenie. And we fall and we don't even know that we have fallen. Think of impurity in here. That may be a bit more obvious. But what about gossiping, idle chatter, idle talk, having an opinion on everybody and everything? Slander. Those little lies that are so subtle that we don't even actually see them as lies. That's how softened and soft we are. We judge people without even thinking. We're jealous of other people. And sometimes it's so subtle that we don't understand that it's jealousy. Rather, we're looking and thinking, they don't deserve that. They really don't deserve that. Whereas we may think that we do deserve that. The greed and acquisitiveness which may grip our lives, but subtly, so that we don't realise. That lure of overtime at work, it may be this. We want to top up that bit more. We want to put a bit more away. This has its place, of course. But it can get to the point where we just can't resist and we have to have that bit more. The things that we say, I'm not hurting anybody else. Do we need yet one more whatever we're enthusiastic about? One more icon even, perhaps. One more book. Even holy things can become a passion for us. And then we think how hypocritical we can be without knowing it. How self-important we can be without knowing it. How proud we can be without knowing it. How vain we can be without knowing it. And then we have anger and irritation. And we say to ourselves, well, it was justified. Sometimes irritation can be justified. As Metropolitan Anthony points out, anger is one in which everybody loses. I'm not talking about righteous indignation at the ills and evils of the world, but the anger of our daily lives. It becomes habitual. Lack of mercy, milosердие, hard-heartedness, lack of compassion, being tough and not sympathetic to other people. Other people can be trying. Some people are very testing for us, to put it the most subtle way. We're surrounded by people, sometimes people who are hypochondriacs, people who are hypersensitive. And we become very lacking in warmth to these people. We become hard-hearted. And we start having grudges. All of these things are evidence of the spiritual war that comes in our lives. And I must admit that when I became Orthodox, this didn't all hit me. It was later on, when you come across good Orthodox teaching and strict Orthodox priests, that you suddenly realise, do you know what? I have been under attack. I have been under bombardment, and I have not even realised it. It was through patristic teaching and through the guidance of our Father Seraphim, who could say, you need to watch these things because they are insidious and they are subtle. They are subtle. And you've been prey to this. We are all easily prey to this. And we don't even know. Not only have we not put the armour on, but we're being hit. But it's more like we're being hit by a pea shooter than with a bullet or with a blade. And yet we are being attacked. And of course the problem is that these things start soft, and it's far on in our lives when we realise that we have become prey and a slave to some of these things. And my goodness, by the time I got into my late 20s and was reflecting on making a life confession before being made a monk, that you suddenly think, oh my goodness, what a mess. If we're hit by shrapnel or bullets or arrows or blades, we most certainly know about it. If we're bombed, if we're attacked by fire or burned or gassed, we know about it. If we're starved or deprived of the basic necessities of life, as we see in the world today, we know about it. If we're crushed, if we're buried, if we're trapped somewhere, we know about it. And yet all of this previous stuff goes on, and we don't even understand it's happening to us. Physical attack is obvious, but spiritual attack, no, not always. Perhaps we could say from the demonic point of view, the best spiritual attack is the stuff that we don't notice, that sneaks through, that gets us, or at least gets us hooked before we can actually start rebelling. St. Paul, of course, writes this to the Christians in Ephesus, in Asia Minor. There are those who say he expected this letter to be copied and to be sent to lots of other places too. And I certainly hope that that was the case, because when we read it, it is so powerful. Put on the whole armour of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. And then he lists, of course, for us this whole armour of God. Stand therefore, having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness. Truth. Truth should characterize everything we do, everything we think, everything we say. And if that's not true of us, can we really be putting on this truth as a defensive armour? We need to reflect. Does truth shine through my life? Righteousness, the breastplate of righteousness. Do we struggle to be righteous in our lives? Does it characterize everything we do? When we talk about the righteous people and we call saints pravedni, righteous, do we think what it means? Because it actually means that such is the power of good and this truth and goodness that there isn't room for anything else. Your feet should be shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. We talk about walking in the ways of God's commandments. We'll have a baptism just in probably less than an hour. And when we put the oil on the feet, it's so that that person may walk in God's commandments. Do we walk in the ways of the gospel? Because we're meant to walk with both feet firmly planted in the ways of the gospel. Not to hop on one leg. Not to just walk in the ways of the gospel, the bits that suit us. Whereas the bits that are a bit more tricky, well then, do you know what, we scamper off along another path. No, we are to put the gospel on as our defensive footwear to lead us where we should be walking. And then we read of the shield of faith to quench the fiery darts of the enemy. What you'll notice, of course, is there's nothing to defend the back in this. There's no back armour. There's nothing on the back of the legs. There's nothing on the thighs. St. Paul sees this as a defensive battle. And it's a defensive battle that will go on from the moment you are baptized to the moment you breathe your last breath. At least, that is the theory. How often are we hot and cold? How often do we start and stop? How often do we have some sort of spiritual bipolarity in which we work really hard and we make progress and we feel the grace of God and we feel, yes, I'm moving, it's happening, it's getting better, only to crash then, or to become lazy, or to slacken off? How often do we work hard through Advent? Do we struggle through Great Lent? And then we come to Pascha and we flag. And in the first week of Pascha, we're under attack. And we haven't simply taken the armour off. We've put our feet up and we're in an armchair and we are there to be absolutely spiritually decimated. St. Paul wrote in a world that was dangerous, in a world of wars, a world of battles, of Roman soldiers marching on those wonderful straight roads and conquering the world. He spoke and he wrote in a world in which Christians were in constant danger, in which tomorrow could be the last day, either through arrest by the temple authorities or arrest by the Roman authorities. He spoke in a world of great danger. And yet those first Christians understood that the real danger is not the danger of physical weapons and of earthly armies. It is the spiritual fight. The spiritual fight to carry on. The spiritual fight to follow Christ. To be filled with light. To share in the resurrection. To share in the transfiguration. There's the famous book, some of you may know, Unseen Warfare. It started its life in the Counter-Reformation as a book written by a Catholic friar called Lorenzo Scupoli. And St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain, Thesagoritis, and St. Theophan the Recluse, Theophan Zatvornik, took this book and said, actually, do you know it may not be orthodox, but this is good. But it could be a lot better. And they perfected and they worked on the basis of this text to make a real manual of the spiritual life. And its title, Unseen Warfare, says it all for us. This is about the spiritual war. And in the first chapter of this famous book, there are 4 key precepts which can help us if we just remember them. The first is never rely on yourself for anything at all. Never rely on yourself. We rely on God for everything. The second precept, always bear in your heart a perfect and all-daring trust in God alone. Trusting in God is daring sometimes, depending on what's going on in our lives. Look at the world now. To trust in God is daring. To hand ourselves, our loved ones, our countries, our friends, our futures over to God. But that's what we have to do. The third one is so important. Strive without ceasing. Don't be going and saying, oh, when will this get better? When will this get easier? Some of our young people come and say to me, when will it get easier? Because this is hard. And I'll say, well, don't ask the question. It probably will with God's grace, but just presume that you're in this and it's going to be like this forever. And the fourth, remain constantly in prayer. Because these first three weapons are acquired through prayer. And they gain full force through prayer. It's through prayer that we obtain all of these things. All of these things are to arm ourselves for ceaseless defensive warfare, for ceaseless battle. And yes, we shouldn't be continually asking, oh, the equivalent of children in the car, the holidays, are we there yet? Asking, when will I get there? When will I get to that point? No, just get on with it. Trust in God that he will help you, but just get on with it. Some of you, definitely looking around, some of you, some of our young people who aren't here, go training. They go to the gym. They go training, they build up muscle, they build up stamina, they keep fit. It's through the struggle, the spiritual struggle, that we get the muscle, that we keep fit. When we sit still, we know our muscle wastes away. We become weak. We find exertion difficult. So, we take this opportunity. And we must be ready. We must always be ready for the spiritual battle. It's no use having the spiritual armour over there and sitting in the armchair over there. Because by the time we get from there to there, it's too late. We've got to be ready and waiting. We've got to be like those Roman soldiers, those sentries, bodyguards, sleeping across the doorway of the emperor or whoever was important. Keep the armour on. Always try to be living in truth. Always try to be a righteous person. Always try to be walking in the way of the gospel. Always be shielding yourself with faith. Not when it gets bad, but always. Somebody came to see me a few days ago and said they were having some problems. And when it got bad, this is what they were doing in terms of prayer. And I said, well, but what are you doing beforehand? They said, oh, well, no, when it starts, I've been advised that this is what I do. And say, no, this is preemptive. I don't take amlodipine when my blood pressure has reached 220 over whatever. I take the medication in order to stay fit and healthy and not keel over. We need to take the spiritual medicine as well. We need to wear the spiritual armour as well. Not when things happen, not when somebody's banging on the door, not when temptation is saying to you, go on, do it. It doesn't hurt, it doesn't matter, it won't hurt anybody. No, it's too late. By all means, start then if you have to, but you should have started before. Do the spiritual stuff before. Do the prayer before. We should always be ready. And this is where we come to the prayer. We need to be ready for the attack, ready to resist the assault, ready to repel the attacker. Suddenly saying, Je vis pour moi Psalm 90, when the world is going crazy and you're really being hit by something, probably won't do a lot. Suddenly saying the Jesus prayer then may have very limited effect. But if you know and you pray and you're ready and you keep vigil and you keep watch, then we're not going to allow the violent attackers in through the door. Last night I sent to one of our youngsters a link for this powerful sermon, homily, which the Blessed Elder Ephraim of Arizona wrote concerning the Jesus prayer. And it is perhaps something for us to take with us when we go away. Because if we're going to go and pray in order to arm ourselves and to acquire all of the defensive things we need, the Jesus prayer surely is the thing that we take first. And Elder Ephraim said, "My children, I beg you for the love of God, do not stop saying the prayer of Christ," the Jesus prayer. "Not even for a moment, your lips should continually murmur the name of Jesus, who destroys the devil and all his plots. Cry out incessantly to Christ, and at once he will hasten wholeheartedly to help us." And then importantly, just as iron cannot be grabbed or even approached when it is red hot, the same thing happens with the soul of him who says the prayer with the fervour of Christ. The demons do not approach it. How could they? For if they draw near, they will be burned by the divine fire which the divine name contains. Everything is reduced to ashes when it comes near the fire of the Jesus prayer. So, my children, struggle in the salvific and sanctifying prayer of our Christ, so that you may become radiant and holy. This is very powerful. Who was it who was told, which monk, I can't remember, you may, "Stop turning that rope, you're burning me"? We need to go and we need to pray, knowing that with the armour of faith and with this prayer, we will make ourselves very, very difficult for the demons to attack and to touch. But again, let's not leave it to the point where we hear the charge, we hear the equivalent of the horse's hooves, or the equivalent of drones and aeroplanes and bombs. Let's be doing all of this stuff beforehand, so that the other may not come near us. And by the grace of God, we will fight, we will defend, we will resist, and Christ will look on us and give us his grace and his blessing in order to raise us up in our battle. Amen.